All right, the AP poll top 25 is out. We're just focusing on the top 10, of course, with the college football playoff rankings unveiled on Tuesday, with a second edition coming up in just a few days. Only real change is Ole Miss now in the conversation of the top 10 after the Rebels win over Texas A&M. One note here, USC drops out of the AP top 25 for the first time under Lincoln Riley. So that's the AP poll, but of course everything leads to the CFP. We've got Brady Quinn joining me here. I'm Tommy Tran. As we take a look at some of the big hitters, Brady, let's first start with Washington. They get the win at SC. Right. If I were to ask you how they looked, plus moving forward, Utah, Oregon State, and Apple Cup, Washington State, what's the likelihood of the biggest trip up for Kalen DeBoer and the Huskies?
I'd have to go with Utah. I mean, Utah had a great bounce back week this past week, just absolutely pounding Arizona State. And I think they present most teams the biggest issue in the Pac-12 because they're so physical at the line of scrimmage. Defensively, airtight, held Arizona State to only 3 points in that game. They run the football well. And as Bryson Barnes continues to make plays down the field, they can surprise a lot of people. And I think if you look at Washington's construct, they don't run the football. They obviously struggle to stop anyone defensively, in particular of late where they've played the 4 of the last weeks have been pretty close. Utah can present them some problems. So that's one I'm really looking forward to seeing how they square off. But this is the Pac-12. I mean, every one of those 3 teams, you could make a case why Washington could drop one. We see this conference continually cannibalize one another as we get down the stretch. But Washington is the best hope for the Pac-12. Well, since Washington, I think back in, 2016 when Washington last made it, they scored on that opening drive in the semifinal game, and Pac-12 hasn't scored since.
Chris Peterson and Jake Browning and company back then. By the way, that game against Utah will be at home at Husky Stadium there. Oklahoma lost over the weekend. If I were to ask you the impact of OU's loss on a Texas and a Big 12 conference champion, what, if any, would that be?
It's that Texas is the only shot for the Big 12 to get a team in the college football playoff. And fortunately for Texas, they were able to eke out a win at home versus Kansas State after it looked like they were completely in control, allowing Kansas State to come right back in there. And look, I know they're playing without Quinn Ewers. I think everyone's expecting them to be playing more consistent offensively, in particular some of the down the field throws that Malik Murphy either put in harm's way or maybe missed on some of those shots. And look, Texas looks the part. When they're at their best, I think Texas can compete with anyone. The question is will we see that version of Texas down the stretch for the rest of the season? And will we get that once they get in the playoffs? Obviously, they need Quinn Ewers back. The expectation is he will be back as starting quarterback next week for Texas. But that's a team to keep an eye on because as a one-loss Big 12 champ, I think they get in, and I think they've got a shot of doing something special.
All right, let's get to another one-loss team. That was sort of the theme both you and Jerry Palm were talking about coming into the first installment of the college football playoff rankings. The Alabama Crimson Tide had all those issues early in the season, quarterback decisions, and yet that win against LSU seems like the Crimson Tide hitting their stride right now.
You do have to acknowledge the fact, though, that when Dallas Turner hit Jaden Daniels, and Jaden Daniels was knocked out of the game, it completely kind of turned the game at that point. Even though, give Bama credit, the defense stepped up in a big way when they needed to down the stretch. Offensively, Jalen Milroe was kind of going stride for stride with Jaden Daniels, too, with some of that offensive production from the quarterback position. So give Bama credit, but it does help when you got really the Heisman frontrunner, Jaden Daniels, knocked out of this game. But to get to Nick Saban, there's some doubts of where this team would be. Obviously, you had, a new offensive coordinator, Tommy Rees. It took some time for them to figure it out. They've got the game plan. The defense is playing at a really high level. They know how effective Jalen Milroe can be running the football along with their ground attack as it is, and some big plays when they have to down the field. That's their formula for success. It's going to be good enough to get them the SEC championship game. Will it be good enough for them to be able to beat Georgia ultimately to get into the college football playoff? That's the biggest question, but as you look through the rest of their schedule, they really shouldn't have any road bumps along the way. They should be able to make it unscathed as a one-loss team and then a shot to win the SEC.
So let me just rehash again the college football playoff rankings. Ohio State 1, Georgia 2, Michigan 3, Florida State 4, and Washington 5. As we again have our eyes nearing to Tuesday night once again, Ohio State down at the half against Rutgers, but then ended up winning comfortably. Florida State as well. Give me just sort of your takeaway if we'll see any type of shakeup you think on Tuesday night.
Well, I think the biggest thing you see right now from the AP poll and what we're seeing in the College Football Playoff Committee is the eye test is coming in more to play with the AP poll. I mean, you see Georgia up top, Michigan ahead of them, then Ohio State at 3 in the College Football Playoff. Not the case. You have Ohio State at number 1 because of what they've done so far. However, that strength of schedule or their resume, it's not going to look quite as good depending on what happens next week between Penn State and Michigan. If Penn State suffers another loss, Notre Dame's already suffered their 3rd loss. Now, they should win out the rest of the season, but it depends on how the committee then looks at that strength of schedule at the end of the season for Ohio State. Right now, they're being rewarded for it. Will they in this upcoming ranking after being down to Rutgers on the road this past week? We'll have to wait and see. I mean, Rutgers is a much improved team under Greg Schiano. They're now bowl eligible again, and they've put up a decent fight. And people tend to forget too, Greg Schiano was a part of that staff there at Ohio State. He knows some of the weaknesses for Ryan Day's offense. I think you saw that a little bit in that game. Nonetheless, Ohio State won. They actually pushed, depending on the odds makers' numbers, and they probably should still be number 1, but at some point, the College Football Playoff Committee you're going to hear the word eye test, and that will come into play as far as how they rank these teams, especially those teams that are undefeated. All
right, Brady, certainly appreciate it. Now, we may not get a ton of change this Tuesday, but that could change 10 days from now because it's set up to have a potentially changing, altering type of landscape with this week's notable matchups. Let me give you Ole Miss and Georgia. You got Michigan and Penn State. You got Utah and Washington, and then you got USC and Oregon. We even talk about the Ducks, of course. They've got a nice opportunity right behind Washington there to get into the college football playoff.